Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we are going through every book that I read in the month of January. I can't believe it's been a whole month in 2026 already. Like, where has the year gone? And it's literally just started. It feels criminal that it has happened so quickly. The good thing about January is that I set myself some reading goals this year and I am determined to stick to them. And I feel like January was a pretty good month reading wise. I read a very different array of books to what I would usually go for. So very excited to get into that today. But before we do, grab yourself a beverage. This is non-compulsory. Today I have a matcha with some honey and it's so good. It's just so good. This is my latest obsession. So for those of you who don't know, I track all of my books in Fable. And if you want to follow me on Fable, I will leave my username in the top of the screen so you guys can follow along. So one of my reading goals this year is actually to read more non-fiction books. I know that non-fiction books aren't always the most exciting to talk about. I will be talking about them briefly because some of the non-fiction books that I read in January were actually really good and I do recommend them. So I feel like it's only fair to talk about them. But in terms of stats, I would say that I read 1 literary fiction, 1 romance, 2 non-fiction, both of which were self-development, which is not something I usually do, 1 sci-fi, and 1 fantasy. My average rating was 4.2 stars. That was a very high month for me. I am a stickler for not giving a book 5 stars unless I really truly feel like it deserves it. Yeah, 4.2 is still pretty high for me. Did I say that I read a total of 6 books? Because I read a total of 6 books as well, which I actually got through a book that had been on my TBR for a really long time, which we'll get into when we get to it. But that book was like 800 pages. So that's almost like 7 books in a way. So I read a combination of audiobooks, Kindle books, and physical books throughout this whole month. And I feel like that was a really good way for me to work through my non-fiction reading goals without it feeling too heavy. I'm definitely not a physical non-fiction book girl. Like, I have to be listening to it as an audiobook or on my Kindle. And the first book that I read for the month of January was The Year I Met My ADHD Brain. So this one is by Matilda Bosley. Essentially, this book was recommended to me by my psychiatrist because I recently had an ADHD diagnosis and I wanted to learn more about how my brain worked, and particularly women, because we experience it a lot differently to men. This book was really just for me to kind of like dip my toes into what ADHD is like for women. And I learned a lot. It was a really good book. It was very validating. It was very validating. A lot of her experiences are quite similar to mine. So I rated that one 4 stars. I really don't have a lot to say about it because it's like, you're probably only going to want to read it if you either A, have ADHD, or if you have a family member who has ADHD or a friend and you want to learn more about it, then this one would be a really great book to get you started. I really enjoyed it. And I just listened to that on Spotify as well. The next book I read, I picked up because I was in a huge reading slump at the end of last year and nothing would get me out of it. I basically only read half of my reading goal for the whole year, which was a little bit disappointing, but also sometimes with reading, you've just got to roll with the punches because you're not always going to feel like reading, and that's okay. I think I kept trying to read and then I just didn't finish any book that I picked up. What I did when it hit January 1st, I said, okay, what author do I know and love? And I can guarantee that I will want to read the whole thing. And that would be none other than Jessa Hastings. She came to the rescue with The Conditions of Will. I had no idea what this was about going into it. I just heard really, really good things. And Magnolia Parks is her other series. If you're not aware, Jessa Hastings has written the whole Magnolia Parks universe, and that is one of my favorite romance series of all time. It's just so good. So I came into this one with really high expectations, but I also knew that I was coming out of a slump, and I was like, just go in with no understanding of what it's about and just fully immerse yourself in the book. And that's what I did. I absolutely loved this. Essentially, it's following Georgia Carter. She is a woman who was living in London and she has to fly home to her hometown in the US for a funeral of her father. You find this out very early on in the book. And it's about her coming to terms with her very, very toxic family life. Lots of family dynamics, particularly lots of lies and deception and mistrust, because this is not a close family. And maybe at times certain family members were closer than they are now. I think if you are someone who has experienced family dynamics that have been not great at times, you'll probably really relate to this book and to this main character. She's not a profiler, but she's working towards becoming someone like in a profession where her skills are to read emotions and read like facial expressions from people and understand what's been going on or what their motives are. And I feel like it was in the CIA or something like that, but obviously the UK version of that. That's kind of her career path that she was working towards. So not only are we following her perspective, but we're also hearing about how she's perceiving all of these dynamics and the decisions that people are making, and kind of from that lens of, well, their facial expressions are saying this, but they're actually saying that, and therefore they're probably lying. It was very interesting. It was really cool to read from that perspective. I haven't read anything like that before. And there's also a love interest, of course there is. That was probably the only part that slightly let this down for me. I found the love interest to be a little bit unbelievable, I think. So the love interest, which I don't think is a huge spoiler, but the love interest suffers with addiction and has overcome that quite a lot. He's also still suffering from it. He became addicted to his ex alongside a lot of like illicit substances and stuff like that. So he's kind of coming into this new situation. He's met Georgia and he's basically said, I never want to get into that situation again. And then lo and behold, he kind of just makes decisions that don't really align with that whole story arc that we learned about him. So that's probably the only part of this book that I wasn't super chuffed with. It felt a little lazy in terms of the writing. I feel like they could have, what do they say? Kill your darlings or whatever. So you have to make decisions that don't end in a happy ending, make the story much more memorable. And I think that's where this kind of let me down a little bit. In saying that, I really enjoyed it. I love Jessa Hastings' writing. She always writes in a way that makes you really understand characters that aren't so likable. You understand why they do the things that they do that might not be the best options. But I ended up giving this 4 stars and I really enjoyed it. I still think about this even weeks later after I finished it, so loved that. Then I read my second non-fiction of the month. I don't know what has come over me this month, but I was just in a non-fiction mood. I was in a self-improvement mood, which is not often for me. I ended up picking up The Mountain Is You. I believe this is by Brianna Wiest, and I listened to the audiobook on Spotify. It's essentially a non-fiction around self-sabotage and getting out of your own way. The book was all about exploring all of these mountains that you have in your life, like putting yourself into situations where you aren't happy or not getting yourself out of those situations. It just had a lot of really interesting facets where self-sabotage can kind of come into your life without you really realizing it, and you can become a bit of a victim to your own circumstances. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think this is the last non-fiction book that I read this month. I think I got my quota. I was like, okay, 2 in a month is just, that's like a third of the books that I read were non-fiction, which is just wild to me. I gave that one 3 stars. I think the only thing I didn't like about this one was, if you are listening to the audiobook on Spotify, the voice, the narrator, is a bit robotic, and it doesn't sound like, sometimes it's easy to disassociate from listening to it. Like I would listen to it on my drives to work and find myself just thinking of other things because the voice was so monotone and robotic. So yeah, that's probably my only takeaway. If you're reading a physical book, you're not going to have that issue, but I just found that the audiobook was a bit over my head a little bit. Yeah. The next book that I read was a book that I'd been hearing a lot about, but I actually didn't know a lot going into it, and it is a bit out of my comfort zone as well. It is a book, I believe it was originally released in 1995. It's called I Who Have Never Known Men, and it's by Jacqueline Hartman. It is essentially a sci-fi novel. It's quite short. I would think it's only 200 to 250 pages. Like, it's really quite short. It essentially follows a group of women who are trapped underground in a cage. It sounds really gruesome. It's not, I promise. It's a bit gruesome, but it's not like a horror. I feel like I have to caveat that. They essentially have no memory of how they got into the cage, but there's about 40 women, and one of those women is actually more of a teenager. She's a lot younger than the rest of the women. You are hearing about the days from her perspective. She's the narrator, this younger woman. I don't want to give too much away because I feel like this is the kind of book that the less you know, the better. And I feel like what I've said so far is all you really need to know. But it was so interesting. There's a lot of questions left unanswered, but also it really leaves you just thinking about the book for days on end after you've finished it. I do want to read more sci-fi books this year. I think that's one of the genres that I want to dip my toes in. So if you guys have any recommendations for sci-fi books, let me know. One that I'm really thinking about is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, I think his name is. And then I also want to read Red Rising as well, which I think is more of a fantasy sci-fi, but any sci-fi books that you guys will recommend, let me know, because it's a genre that I'm enjoying, particularly with the unanswered questions side of things, and it really forces you to kind of fill in the blanks of why you think certain things have been, you know, presented in the way that they are. Like this book, for example, it's like you may not find out all of the information that you need to, because it's being told from the perspective of someone who also doesn't know how they got there, as they're trying to unravel all of the women's stories about what they do remember about the time before they were in the cage. It just kind of, it's very interesting and it's fun. It's a fun kind of genre to read because you're almost problem solving at the same time to try to figure out what's happened without all the crazy world building that comes with like a fantasy book. So yeah, really, really enjoyed that one. And I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. I think that was potentially my highest rating. No, it wasn't. That's a lie. That's kind of like mid-tier. How exciting. The next book, and this was the second last book that I read for this month, was People We Meet on Vacation. And I was so excited to read this book because if you don't know, the movie just got released on Netflix. This is by Emily Henry. It's one of her older books. Can't believe I hadn't read this sooner. This book gets a lot of hate. It doesn't get hate, it just gets a lot of people saying it's not their favorite book, and I just simply don't understand. I love this book. It has travel, it has friends to lovers, it has then and now timelines. It is just so fun, and the main characters they're everything. Like Poppy is unapologetically herself. I just love her. I love her so much. Her energy is so fun, and I think her character arc is incredible. Alex, the male main character, is just like the perfect cutesy, soft, but, you know, stoic man who maybe doesn't share as much as he probably could have earlier on in the book, but it's just, their dynamic is just so fun. It's like Grumpy Sunshine as well, with Poppy being the sunshine and Alex being the grump, but I just love it. I love it. The premise of this book, if you don't know, is we're following, like I said, Poppy and Alex, and Poppy is a travel writer. She gets sent off to lots of different places for the business that she works at, and her role is to write really fun, engaging articles about how luxurious and exciting those places are to visit. Alex is a high school teacher. They meet at uni, and they agree that every summer, no matter how busy life gets, every summer they'll go on a week trip to a different place, and they will use that time to kind of connect and continue their friendship. They do talk outside of that week, but they mainly are catching up in that week, and it kind of just follows where they're at now, because there seems to have been a relationship breakdown in present time, and where they were every single summer up until that point. And all you kind of know going into the book is that 2 summers ago everything changed, and now they no longer talk. So it's just like really fun trying to piece together exactly what happened, who did what, and why they weren't talking for so long. And I just feel like the yearning and the slow burn of this book is it's just perfect. It's funny as well. Like the banter was fantastic. So this one I did give 5 stars. I did unfortunately watch the movie, and I didn't enjoy it as much. They changed so much of the plot in the movie. I didn't think that they would, because it didn't really make sense for them to. Like there were very specific plot points that they changed. It didn't add anything to the story to change it, so I don't know why they made that decision. It was very, very interesting. Like for example, when Alex and Poppy meet in present time, they meet at Palm Springs for a wedding. In the movie, they meet in Barcelona. I'm like, why? Palm Springs makes so much more sense given the context of the book. But anyway, I digress. The book was amazing. I gave it 5 stars. So the other part of the movie, I know this is not about the movie, but the other part of the movie is that there were so many like intimate scenes in the book where you got to learn about Poppy and Alex's relationship, and like it helped to build the tension and the yearning and the slow burn of it all, and they just completely missed that in the movie. So you got to the end and you're like, okay, but like why? What? Like it didn't make sense that they ended up where they did, because you didn't see. And obviously in any book to movie adaptation, you are always going to get that, unfortunately, but I don't make movies. I don't know what goes into them. So all I know is that one was 5 stars. And drum roll please. The last book that I picked up this month has been on my TBR for such a long time. I read the first book in this series, and I'm being a bit elusive because I think it's fun. I read the first book in this series, I want to say a few years ago now. Like it has been, when was it? I think it was when I went to Japan, which would have been not last year, but the year before in February. So 2 years ago is when I read the first book in this series. This is the second, and that is the Crescent City trilogy. This is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. and we are following Bryce and Hunt, just what they get up to and all of the other people in their lives who we came to love from the first book. There's one thing about Sarah J. Maas's writing, and that's that she can write a tome of a book, like an actual tome of a book. This book is like 800 pages and I will eat it up every time. I really will. And yeah, you can say her books are long, but I really don't think you can actually cut too much out of them because the world building and the connections in these books, any of her books really, it's just second to none. I have not read a single other fantasy series that lives up to Sarah J. Maas, unfortunately. If there is one, let me know, because I would love a book that's going to get me out of the reading slump that this series, when I finally end it, will surely put me into. I loved this. I gave it 4.5 stars. The only reason I didn't give it 5, I didn't like it as much as the first book. I think the first book in this series had a stronger plot line, whereas this one kind of was a bit here and there in terms of the plot line. Like, it's so character driven that it doesn't really matter so much. But if I was to change one thing, I think storyline wise, it did feel a little bit like a second book in a series. But I'm very excited to start the third one, and I'm surely not going to leave it. I'm not going to leave it 2 years to finish the third book. You heard it here first, guys. If I do, let me know, because I just don't like disappointing you guys. So they are all the books that I've read in the month of January this year. I think we've started off so strong. Like, not only did we read 6 books, which I'm so happy about, considering last year there were some months I didn't read any books, but we also read some really highly rated books. The only book that I rated below 4 stars was a non-fiction, and that was simply because it was hard to listen to as an audiobook, being a non-fiction. So I think that's pretty successful. I hope you guys enjoyed, and let me know what you guys read this month if you have any recommendations, and I will see you for my next video. Bye.